SparkEffect and Guidewise, and I'm Kim Bohr, CEO of SparkEffect. In case you're not familiar with us, we're a 40-year-old leadership and talent firm built on the idea that leadership is trust infrastructure. It's what determines whether disruption becomes a setback or a real advantage. And I'm joined today by my friend Ted Wolf, CEO of Guidewise AI, whose company works with organizations navigating the shift to agentic AI through thinking about governance, workflow design, and really answering those hard questions about how people work alongside autonomous systems. Once a month, Ted and I are going to go through these types of conversations. We want to cut through the hype. We want to talk honestly about what is really happening inside of our organizations and what's being impacted in your organizations. These are the kinds of conversations that CEOs really typically only have off the record, and we want to bring more of that into this dialogue. So today, and again in May, we're using these first two episodes to introduce ourselves, beginning with Ted today turning the tables on me and talking about the recent move I've made into the CEO seat of SparkEffect. With that, Ted, I'll turn it over to you.
Kim, I've been waiting to talk to you for a long time about this. We've had numerous conversations and podcasts that we videoed, but I think your background is very rich and you have an awful lot to share. So I'd like to learn myself. What's the difference now that you're a CEO? Why now? And what does the title mean?
You know, it means, if you think about it from just some of the day-to-day, that hasn't necessarily changed, right? Because that is stuff that I was already doing. You know, this move is really a culmination of a planned succession that Mike and I had when I started 6 years ago. So when you think about that part, there's less of kind of, you know, that part is kind of still in motion. But what it does mean is this is opportunity for this external voice, the ability to be the face of SparkEffect. That's certainly one of the big pieces. It's also really thinking about the access that it gives coming into SparkEffect, and really what I can do for our organization. It would be foolish for me to pretend that titles don't matter, right? They absolutely do. And some of these conversations between CEOs are only going to happen in those formats. And so really being able to open the doors to some of these conversations that were harder to walk through before, I think is part of what this affords the company. And then I think the third kind of piece that I think about is the greater accountability it brings. You know, obviously I was a key piece of our strategy in driving that, but now it's different when we think about where that really lands, that accountability piece lands for what we're going to get right or get wrong.
Yeah, so I can remember when I first became a CEO of an organization, much different than an operating or a lead operating person. So when you look at the organization today, SparkEffect,
Mm-hmm.
what do you see that you could afford to not see in the past?
You know, I see so much around how quickly the way work is happening is changing. And when we're in the middle of it operating, we're obviously doing the best we can to stay ahead of it. As I'm now having different conversations with other leaders inside their organizations, we're seeing how fast AI is really changing work. We're looking at the macro environment and the impact that's happening. And there's a lot of ask around how do we still ultimately think about leadership and trust and doing business that's good and well. And so I think what I couldn't see before is what some of these other people were experiencing, and to find out that there's a lot of overlap regardless of the size in the industry as far as some of the challenges that we're all trying to navigate right now.
Yeah, so as a CEO, you're focused on the future. As a chief operating officer, you're focused on the present. Big
Yeah.
shift. What are 2 or 3 big goals or things that you really want to put in place in the next 12 months?
So there's the three that come to mind are we're really undergoing a reshaping of some of our offerings because of we really want to meet the moment that leaders are facing. The reality is that a lot of what's out there for leaders isn't built for the level of speed we're dealing with, for the AI world that we're in, and all the shifts that are happening so quickly. So we are actively reshaping some of these really critical offerings to meet that moment. The other thing is to really position SparkEffect as the firm that executives and boards want to turn to first when these questions get really hard. So that when they need to have these honest conversations, when they really want to talk about what's happening with leadership in this very moment. And we want to be that trusted partner they come to because they know we have a different level of understanding. The third thing is really about the work that we've set out to do last year that really is going to push forward this year. And that's really that demonstrating that trust is genuinely the under-recognized valuable in growth, and that working on a case-to-case basis with all these teams and executives we work with is helping them understand this real necessary quality about the way they're shaping their business. Trust is what has been missing in the way that we're talking about it. And so really my goal is that for over the next 12 months, we are absolutely recognized for that.
And how are you going about getting that recognition? There's a
Mhm.
lot of noise out there. There's thousands and thousands of podcasts, etc. How are you going to get the truth of Spark Effect and yourself into the market?
Well, I think, it starts with being trustworthy ourselves and how we show up and how I show up. Having this, like, as I was saying before, right? Having this title as CEO and the platform, there is a difference. It opens doors. It does afford conversations that maybe weren't as easily accessible, taking advantage of those moments, working on, finding those outlets that we can be speaking on a broader scale, and talking inside our organizations and talking with executive teams around what they can do to find greater alignment. So it's really a multi-pronged approach, not just from the lens that I have, but also from what our teams are doing, how we're working through from a digital standpoint, because meeting people where they're at in how they look for information now is very different than it was even a few years ago. And so really trying to come at it from a few different aspects.
Okay. So how would you articulate then when you're talking to another individual, a prospect or even a client, and you're talking to a peer, a C-suite level type of individual? How are you going to get the purpose of what Spark Effect is? How are you going to speak about that, and how would you be presenting that to a peer?
Really talking about what is the biggest challenge that you're facing right now as the CEO or senior executive inside your organization, and really helping to understand what those real challenges are, and then making that connection where the trust is likely a real key pivotal piece that
Mhm,
perhaps isn't being considered in the same way it was previously. The
mhm,
thinking about the reality that trust can be measurable and that it is as important as any other KPI an organization is measuring is a fundamental change. And so having the conversations of understanding, what is really going on in for that executive team, for that organization, and just talking about it, and also talking about it from the perspective of the challenges that we've faced and how we've been navigating it through all the disruption that we're seeing.
okay. What do you think some of the main obstacles will be now that you're the CEO guiding the company into the future? What will your obstacles what are you anticipating being some of your biggest obstacles you're gonna have to deal with?
I think there's a lot of noise out there, and and noise from various aspects, right? There's noise from these macro environments that we're just trying to navigate, and there's a ton of uncertainty. There's also noise from a lot of organizations that are trying to, do work in leadership development or do work in outplacement or all these tactical things that frankly isn't all done the same way. And I think that because there's so many different outlets, people are getting so much information. It's really around how do we cut through that noise. And so much of it at the most foundational level is about building trust and really bringing that forward into why the work we do is so different. and we're trying to be relatable to what's happening. You and I have had conversations around the forces that are in what's changing, that are things are out of our control, but it directly is impacting our business. And how are we rolling with those punches, so to speak, and trying to make really sometimes challenging decisions to move forward. So bringing that relatability into these conversations is going to be, it continues to be really key.
Yeah. I know when I first became CEO of the organization, it was a small title change, but inside in myself, it was a big change. And I found that people were talking to me differently. And these are people that I worked with for years. Have you noticed anything like that in your experience?
I think what was good from an internal perspective is because this was a very transparent transition and it had taken place over a series of years, and as Mike continued to step out and I continued to take on more internally, there wasn't a lot of shift, right? It was more of a, okay, great, we're here. That being said, there are different approaches I am taking. I've just started listening to her inside our own organization to understand, with some very specific questions around what are things that perhaps I'm not seeing or aren't filtering up to me. I think that when you think externally, have already seen a difference in the conversations and in who's taking my meetings that perhaps weren't as interested prior.
Mhm, mhm. Let's talk a little bit about addressing and assessing the market. One of
Mhm.
your main responsibilities going forward is going to be strategy. How are you going to connect the dots a little bit differently? Because the world's changing, the economy's changing, people are changing, technology obviously is changing. How are you looking at your organization and evaluating the strengths, the weaknesses, the opportunities, the threats, the SWOT analysis type of viewpoint in your organization?
Yeah, so we're meeting on a frequent basis. We've taken in market research data. We're looking at all of those kind of things. We're looking at things that also are the obvious indicators, but they're lagging indicators. Revenue and churn and things like that. What we're really starting to focus on is, what are our clients saying? What are prospects saying? How are people finding us? Are they finding us because a trusted person somebody knew said, oh, you need to be speaking to SparkEffect? And knowing that those forward trust building type of uh, referrals or moves are things that are going to really be really critical in how we think about where that ground truth is, if you will. Having people, if a client is telling us right away we've missed the mark, or are they just choosing not to tell us or delaying that, and then we think we have a stronger relationship than we do. So
Mhm,
to me, those are really going to be really key indicators to think about how the business is moving, as we continue to build out and expand.
mhm. So I found the SWOT analysis was a good analogy for me to go in and keep in the back of my mind when I'm talking to either my employees or also at the same time clients, because I found finding out what the truth is
Yep.
required a different type of listening and a different type of questioning. So let's just talk a little bit, if we can, the changes that are taking place in technology.
Hmm.
How are you going to begin probing them in your strategy and implementing that into Spark Effects going forward?
Well, that, I mean, it's everything is moving so quickly. So of course we're already well, in implementing changes around AI, as far as how we look at it from a productivity standpoint and a workflow standpoint. So for like many organizations, we're already at that stage. What we also are doing, though, is how is technology informing the work we're doing? How is it informing what's impacting our clients? And how do we look at that, incorporating it into what can help us deliver a better solution that the clients need, given how fast technology is shifting, and what do we need to be ahead of? And so a lot of that is trying to understand how are clients being impacted with technology, or how are they utilizing it, and what do we need to do to meet that moment with them as well. And so trying to stay think as we're thinking about how we are updating some of our solutions, technology is a very much a real piece of that. And then it's about, in many ways, the work your organization does around how do we think about this from a place of of real pull through and
Mhm.
implementation and adoption in ways that have things stick and don't feel like they're just being thrown at random use cases and not actually in a more
Mhm.
focused way.
Mhm. So I read your research, and it's extremely interesting when we first started talking about trust, and you'd be able to put metrics on trust and things like that. It's very rare that you're going to be able to talk to a CEO of an organization that can talk about trust and metrics in the same sentence or the same paragraph, even. Tell me how you came about that as kind of like, okay, here's one of the foundational principles of our organization. Trust is really important, not
Mhm.
just in our own organization, but how can we help other people get it? What led you to that concept, that principle that really put you on the map in many ways? But how did you get there, and where do you want to take that message?
So we were really curious last year around all the disruption that was happening, AI being a leading component of that, and what was happening inside organizations. Because we kept hearing either people say there were trust issues as we would talk to the market, or words that essentially were around this concept of trust. And we would also hear that trust was a soft thing and it would be nice if we could measure it. And what we set out to do is actually to prove that you could measure it and to understand what is disruption doing to trust inside organizations, because we felt like there was almost this desperate call from those that we would hear from around the fact that we've got to do something differently, or we're not aligned as an organization or aligned as a team. And so we set out to do this research with a very close partner of ours who's a PhD in workplace anthropology, Aaron Delgatti. And we really structured a real solid research paper with a hypothesis that was really founded in what's going to happen here inside organizations. And what we found was that it was tremendously, AI is very disruptive. It's not the biggest breaker of trust, but we were able to identify what those things were. What that also showed us was trust became the central theme in so much of what our clients were looking for and missing, and what we realized we actually have in the way we approach our entire business. And so, what we're doing is to continue to build on that research with a second version of that report this year. We're also really bringing forward to the market how much trust is the through line of every single thing we do, and we can back it up and prove it, and really trying to help then organizations understand you really can measure trust just like every other KPI, and we can show you how. It's not as hard as you think. It requires some alignment and some different conversations.
Mhm, mhm. And is there something different? I mean, where do you see the next step going then? Where do you want to take the organization in the future around that whole concept of trust? How are you going to build on that?
We want to be known as the organization that absolutely isn't only trustworthy, but absolutely is building trust into every single way we interact with our clients and those in our community. It's not just saying trust is this soft skill. It's really about we actually have built it into what we do, and we want to build on that, and we want to lead with that, and we want organizations to actually take what we've been able to produce and implement it systematically inside their organization so they can see that trust is a real measurable component. And so we want to continue to take that beyond just the research. And as I mentioned, as we're evolving these products to meet what the market is asking for, that is a real key critical, that's the leading factor that's threaded through. So for us, we want, it's being known as an expert in the state of organizational trust,
Mhm.
and really recognize that we are an authority in that space, and we actually can help elevate your organization by bringing this in a more measurable component.
Okay. And how will you know yourself if you're being successful? You as a CEO, but the organization itself, how will you know in the future if you're being successful?
Well, I mean, aside from the obvious indicators that, as we said, were more the laggards, right? Really understanding are people coming to us because they've heard of us? Are they talking about trust in a way that the executive team is aligned in, that we hear from not just HR leaders, but we hear from other levels of executives on how trust is a central strategy for how they're thinking about their business. And by having those referrals come to us and people talking about knowing that where our expertise is and what we can do, that is really going to be a key measurement. So that proactive nature of what we hear and having that recognition, also talking to other people like we're doing here, having this thought leadership truly bubble up to real strategy and not just something that traditionally has felt squishy. It's no longer squishy. And the more we have these kind of conversations and the more organizations start to see trust as the strategy component, the more we are then starting to really move the bigger mountain of business that frankly just needs to be a better steward of its community and its employees than many are today.
Okay. So you've been officially the CEO for a month now,
Yes.
correct?
Yes.
Any surprises?
I would say, you know, um, the opportunity to have more of these conversations as I mentioned, those doors have been opening a lot easier. And so there's been just more of those happening in a really interesting way and expanding my thinking on what is other organizations are experiencing, what other leaders are experiencing, and what we need to do about it. I think as I mentioned, the day to day is less surprising, but the opportunity to be in rooms that were not as easily accessible before has really shown up clearly already.
Okay, good. And when you look at the organization itself right now, um, the geography that you're covering, what would that be right now?
So we've always had a global reach in what done. We are a national US based organization. We continue to really expand more into different areas of the US and really just trying to continue to get the word out. One thing we haven't talked about yet is that we had a merger in 2023, and through that process, we rebranded as SparkEffect. So although SparkEffect has a 40-year history, especially because the two firms existed for that long, the
Mhm.
name is still new. And so really having people associate SparkEffect with the authority and trust that we do, what we're able to build for organizations, that is something that we're really very much a big push this year.
Mhm. I love the name Spark Effect, and I know with companies, there's always a little story or usually a little story about how you came across the name and what that experience was like the instant you knew this was it. Tell us a little bit about that.
For us, it was really an opportunity to think about something that felt about around growth. Momentum was a word that continued to come through in everything we did. We wanted it to ignite change and transformation. And
Mhm.
so we went through a very rigorous process with a firm that was, just tried to give us all these different options. And they were just really great options to choose from. But the more we kept talking about, well, what does it mean when we think about what we do, it was all around sparking curiosity, sparking growth, sparking change and transformation. And we really felt like that became known as Spark Effect.
Mhm. And what would you say 12 months from now,
Mhm.
looking back at today, what would you say you think you want to be able to tell yourself, this is the biggest transformation I have made as now becoming a CEO and guiding the organization?
I think by uh, thinking less like an operator, right? I've had a lot of that in my blood for a long time. And really shifting that thinking to where in 12 months, really having positioned Spark Effect on a much more recognizable national and stage, really having conversations with organizations and executives that are much more strategic in how we're thinking about helping them evolve their own business growth and their own strategy and being a part of those, moving the company into those kind of conversations. So moving beyond perhaps a vendor type of status to really being in a much more in the room, being in the room. And so wanting to be a part of bringing the organization to that level of recognition. And so really in 12 months, seeing us being recognized that way, having people come to us and seek us out because of how they've heard about us and the reputation we bring forward, that will be really enriching and fulfilling. And knowing that the team that we have and the way that this team is currently evolving is really it's the right team. I'm really confident in how it's shifting and evolving right now, and knowing that they are the strong operators, and that my shift really moves into building out this more further the strategy and helping us be known.
So I recognize inside myself, I work best at 90-day goals. If I have a 90-day goal out there, I can reflect real quickly and I can keep everybody around me focused on 90 days. If I say 12 months, that's pretty hard to imagine in many ways today. So what would your 90-day goal be? What outcome, single outcome, do you want to put in place and say, here's what I want to achieve over the next 90 days for the benefit of the organization, or the employees and the clients that we're serving?
So, we know that we're updating some of these products and things. So at that operational level, right, there's that stuff is happening in the next 90 days. What I want to be doing is in conversation with more of these executives that we know we're there to make a difference in, and having these peer-to-peer conversations like you and I are doing about what's really still challenging the business, and thinking it as, from a strategy perspective. So having more of those that are door opening conversations of curiosity, helping them think about their own business differently, just from a peer-to-peer standpoint, and really looking at shoring up, helping the team remove any of the obstacles that they're facing in some of these things that we've set out to do this year. And so trying to keep helping them so that they can stay focused on the execution, and allowing me to open up more of those strategic conversations.
Mhm. Kim, I got a feeling you're going to be very successful at what you do. You're easy to relate with, you're easy to work with, talk to. So I wish you the best of luck in the next 90 days. I can't wait to hear more about it. And I think in the next 12 months, you're going to hit a home run.
Ted, thank you so much for this. It's been really fun. I'm excited to turn the tables on you next month and talk about your new book that's coming out and all that you're doing. So I hope our listeners will join us then. We'll be posting about that and sharing the date, the last Wednesday of the month. And it's been fun. So I'm really looking forward to more of these conversations and letting everybody into a little bit more about what we're doing.
Great. Kim, thanks for your time. Enjoyed the conversation very much.
Thank you, Ted.